Hello, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here. So my name is Timothé Masson. I don't work for a company, in fact. I work for an association. My association is called the World Association of Beet and Cane Growers. It is an association that groups together farmers, independent farmers, so growers, who can grow sugar beet or sugar cane in different countries. We have 36 countries participating in our work. My president comes from USA, and the vice presidents are from Brazil, Morocco, and France. As we do not have an Indian Federation of Independent Growers, our member in India is a technical center, and I thank you very much for their invitation. The goal of my association is to bring people discuss together. If you are a sugarcane grower or a sugar beet grower, very often you have the same problems around the world. So my main work is to benchmark. For that, we organize meetings twice a year, one in November in London, and every spring or summer in a host country. So the last one was in Cali, Colombia for sugar canes, and the next one will be in USA for sugar beet. We make some publication. And we make some studies, mainly on economic studies, but this year my members wanted me to focus on carbon farming. So it won't be a presentation only regarding sugar beet, but it's also regarding sugar cane. Can we reduce carbon emission at farm level? How is it done around the world? And can it bring some money for the farmer? Because once again, I am paid by farmers. So the main topic is, for my study, can we imagine that one day we will be paid for carbon reduction or even carbon sequestration at farm level, in sugarcane or in sugar beet? I will speak about carbon farming, which is a new term. 10 years ago, we did not speak about carbon farming. So what is carbon farming? Carbon farming, it's a way that we can reduce the carbon footprint in the farm by reducing carbon emissions or by trying to implement measures to store carbon in the soil. The goal of my study is not to compare sugarcane and sugar beet. It is not to compare sugar or ethanol. It is just to see how this topic is fed by the growers around the world. And for that, 21 members replied from India to Malawi or Mexico, from Sweden to Australia. And first of all, I'm not a technician, but just the technical part. How can we reduce carbon emissions? First, before to reduce, we need to know when we farm at farm level, where does carbon emissions come from? And in many countries that have a big interest in that, the first job that we have to make is to try to know at your farm, at your very specific farm, because we cannot make means. Average would have no sense for that. We need to evaluate the carbon footprint of your farm. And in many developed or such-called developed countries, subsidies, you mentioned this morning subsidies are often paid in that purpose, to finance carbon footprint in a farm level. It's the case, for instance, in Europe, where you can get subsidies to have information about your carbon emissions. And if you try to analyze those results, the main emissions for cane and beet are first fertilization, and by far we will see it. Fertilizers emissions when you produce the fertilizers, but also when you lose in the field via N2O. We'll speak about carbon, but in fact it's not only carbon, it's green gas emission. On carbon, the most usual carbon, CO2, have an impact in terms of climate, but much less than CH4, which have 25 times more impact than CO2, and even more with N2O, nitrous oxide, 300 times more than CO2. And this is the main greenhouse gas emission in our crops, sugarcane or sugar beet. It is during fertilization, but also via fuel. And it can also be, of course, burning. I know in India some harvests are still done after burning, and of course this can release greenhouse gas emission. I've seen brilliant posters on the topic in the room next to here, but also energy for irrigation, land use changes, and so on. Let me try to present the big figures. For this, I tried an example. This example will be taken in France, my home country, with Sugarbeet, but it is exactly the same if you consider sugarcane. If I take an average standard farm, northern France, a normal farm in France, it's 150 hectares, with sugarbeet being grown on less than 40 hectares. In this farm, if you make a carbon footprint, you will find that 80% of the carbon emissions come from the fertilization. So it's mainly fertilization, with the 2/3 coming to losses in the field. So if you want to improve your carbon emission at farm level, which would be of interest for the civil society, you need to focus on fertilization. You have also fuel, but fuel is only 8%. And I told you before, the main problem was N2O, which bring our member from Australia saying that if you want to reduce carbon emissions, then don't focus on carbon, but focus on nitrous oxide. One point also is that the third of what a farmer emit in terms of carbon emission come from farmer suppliers, fuel or fertilization when you produce the fertilizer. And this is why one of our members said that biofuel or biogas are the best friends, even if it's used by supplier to produce this energy. So now, concretely, what can I do? What can we do as a farmer to reduce my carbon emissions? Fertilization, we've seen that the main goal would be to put less application without disturbing the yield, because as a farmer, what we want is a good yield. If you want, but you can use less application with a good yield if you use precision agriculture. If you make some rotation with pulses, this can be done with beet and with cane, and I'm very happy to have seen also in the fields next to here different rotation with sugar cane, including grams. I've not seen soy, but I've seen also different crops, which can be harvested or which cannot be harvested, just produced to reduce carbon. The post-harvest non-burnt residues, especially for the can, can also allow you to have less fertilizers and thus to improve your carbon footprint. Then you can use different fertilizers, moving from mineral to organic fertilizer. And here, once again, in the room next to here, I've seen brilliant posters concerning organic fertilizer with compost and even vermicompost. Knowing that some organic fertilizer, like compost, can produce much more equivalent CO2 that mineral fertilizer. So this can be done in a proper way. And to reduce the losses in fields via the N2O, you have some enhanced efficiency fertilizers with slow release fertilization form, nitrification inhibitors, and uncoated fertilizers. This is markets that are very much emerging almost everywhere in the world. And I'm sure that in India, in coming years, you will have this kind of improved fertilizer, which do not only have interest in terms of carbon farming, but only in terms of efficiency of what you apply. It's a bit more expensive when you buy it, but it's much more efficient for the plant. Then, of course, you have many things to do in terms of fuel with traffic optimization and no tillage, but I won't speak about that. And different measures can be done, especially for stop burnings, but also to keep the residues with here big topics. If you are a farmer, you are paid according to the weight of what you deliver to the industry. So one topic would be to keep some of the leaves in your farm to improve your yield by using this biomass to produce equivalent fertilizer. The point is then that you will be less paid. So we need to find new equilibrium in shares between growers and factories. And this should be a topic that must be addressed all around the world. if we want to implement new measures by growers, they need to be paid for that. Of course, don't burn, but then sometimes you need mechanized harvest, because if growers burn the cane, it's not only because they love to burn, it's because they fear rats or snake or other animals. So they need to be replaced by something else, otherwise they won't do it. And then concerning irrigation, there is a lot to be done in solar pump. Our question was more, is this only theory, or can we make money with that? Once again, let's go back to France with the example of farm I gave you by the past. If you try to implement the easier measures to reduce carbon, then you will implement organic manure. You will use ammonitrate instead of liquid nitrogen. You will insert pulses in intercrop. Here it will be Vicia. And then if you do that, you can divide your emission by 2, which is an equivalent of 2 tons of CO2 per hectare in France. But the production cost will increase by 10%. And 10%, if you take the production cost in India, it should be the same amount. If you take the production cost in India, 10% is a huge amount for a farmer, and for the moment, they will not be interested to do that. But before to go back to a more economical point of view, let's try to sequestrate. We just mentioned up to now the carbon reduction. If we want to sequestrate carbon, and nowadays the civil society, I don't know if it's the case in India, but in many parts of the world, civil society asks the farmers to sequestrate carbon. How can you sequestrate? You can make it from cane and beet residue by soil incorporation, knowing that carbon storage is extremely limited in long term, because in the longer term, incorporate biomass in the soil will emit N2O, so it will release greenhouse gas emission. And there is now, and it comes from the UK, United Kingdom, evidence that the efficacy of practices to increase carbon sequestration is extremely limited. It can even increase carbon emissions to implement those measures. So for the moment, according to the state of the art of the technical, it's not possible to make a proper sequestration from cane and beet residue, even if there is some ongoing projects. For the moment, the main challenge is to keep on feeding the soil all around the year, otherwise you will lose the benefits that you can implement via the residues. We have seen it's extremely difficult to sequestrate carbon from cane and beet, but can it be done by something else than residue? Before to move to something else, we can transform those residues. It can be done via compost, we have seen it. It can also be done via biochar. And I've seen there is a poster on biochar in the room next to here, and I suggest that you go and have a look at this poster, because biochar is very much emerging in some countries, mainly in India, but also in Africa. And it has been very documented, and it's a very serious topic to produce biochar from the residues of cane and beet. If it's not done in a proper way, it can emit a lot of carbon, much more than what is done, but it's done also in purpose of improving the soil, which does not work in every soils, but in some soils it can indeed improve the conditions. If it is used outside the farm, keep in mind that it's another activity. And if a farmer wants to do that, he should, before implementing this, he should ask himself, is it really the most remunerative diversification for my farms? And be careful to your yield, because you can decrease your yield by implementing such practices. Something else like residues, and this is a topic that frightens a lot of your colleagues all around the world, because if you want to sequestrate carbon, maybe sugarcane and sugarbeet are not the best crops, so you should maybe do something else than cane and beet. And it has been done in Ivory Coast, for instance, where farmers have been paid to sequestrate carbon, and thus they put less sugarcane on more thick forest. In Malawi, landowners may change their production to use the land in carbon sinks. And this is why our member from Sudan reminds that it's very important to conciliate food security as well as climate change, knowing that if carbon credits tomorrow become a new commodity, maybe one day it will be more remunerative than sugar. This is not something that can happen it can happen within a short term. I mean, it's not very long term. Carbon farming in many countries, carbon economy can begin to become a commodity, a remunerative commodity in some countries, which will have some impact in other countries. So then on this, we'll close my presentation focusing on economy. Why should a farmer make some carbon farming? He will do it only because a third party can pay for doing it. Otherwise, he won't do it. As I told you, it's costly, 10% of your production cost. For the moment, it is not remunerative. You have some examples in Sweden, in Belgium, mainly in Europe, but also in Australia, where you can be paid to make some carbon farming, but it's not so remunerative. And it will become harder and harder because slowly by slowly there is some certification on carbon farming to prevent greenwashings, with a challenge to conciliate simplicity, to have a simple way to be certified, but also control to make sure that you are not paid twice for one effort that you can make. This can be summarized by what I've replied our member from Mexico. Farmers should not consider income from carbon credit as part of their financial analysis. Or from your colleague in Belize, in South America, fears that small-scale farmers won't benefit from those schemes that can only be achievable by big structure. And I keep in mind that in many countries, sugarcane are grown by factories. It's the case, for instance, in Brazil. And sometimes it's much more easy to improve your practice if you are big groups than if you are a small-scale farmer. The competition will be hard, and slowly by slowly we will move towards international rules to create it. This is the first part. So a farmer can be paid by a third party, but it can also be paid by the buyers. But your buyers, the sugar factories, especially even in India, and especially if they want to go to the world market, they will have to prove they make some effort in terms of carbon emission reduction. And then if he will have to do this, I'm not sure he will pay for that because it will become mandatory. And in my career, I do not have any example of something mandatory which is extra paid in the long term. So on my views, if it's mandatory, it will not be paid to the growers. And this has been replied by our member from Australia, who says that the market may support methodologies that may reduce greenhouse gas emission, but that would also reduce sugarcane production. In the UK, take only into consideration the cost of the measures, but not the impact on the yield. That should also be paid to the growers, but this will probably never be paid, with an increased risk of dependence of individual farmers from big agro-industry companies. But maybe if farmers will change their practices within the next 10 years, it will also be because they will have to. And, well, it has been mentioned concerning, for instance, the burning of the cane. If people reduce the burning of the cane, it's because they have to, and they rarely have extra money for that around the world. Many states have a goal in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, and this goal can be fixed by law or not, and they will have to take measures to achieve it. And some farmers, anyway, will be prohibited from participating if they do not adopt such practices, not only in industry, but also in the finance sector. It can also be a mix, and I have a good example in Brazil with the RenovaBio program. RenovaBio program, I won't detail it, but it's a very interesting program because it's something that it is mandatory, but that is paid by the consumers, focusing on ethanol, mandatory by law, but paid by the consumers. But then you cannot be extra paid by something else. And if the farmers do not receive share of their effort, then it won't be sustainable. And that is why our member from Brazil would like to receive their share for this effort. So to conclude my presentation, carbon farming is a vast subject that has been widely studied by many growers' associations around the world. First, because it can be a source of income from the growers. And some examples show that it can exist all around the world, although legal ongoing frameworks may minimize it in the coming years. And then farmers' associations have interest on carbon farming because they fear that it will become mandatory. It can be made mandatory by law or by commercial rules, and this will certainly impact our production costs, and this will certainly impact the yields. Tomorrow, this is the equation to recall the potentiality of our production to reduce fossil CO2 emissions, because in fact what the civil society maybe want is not that we reduce our carbon emission, but that we reduce our fossil carbon emissions. This can be done via ethanol and green chemistry, but also to encourage new outlets, including from our byproducts, bagasse in sugarcane or pulp in the sugar beet. All for that, to conclude, this message is that slowly by slowly we are moving with new equilibrium between the products, sugar, ethanol, but also with co-products, pulp and bagasse, that need to be anticipated. Sugarcane growers, you have something very powerful in your hand, which is the bagasse, and this would make sense that you receive a part of what is done with the bagasse. And more widely, we should move towards new ways to valorize our production, not directly linked to commercial yields, but also for the services that we can give to the society. And this will conclude my speech. Thank you very much.